All right, everybody, we're back with our second installment, our second video of Conversations with David. And so last week, we unpacked his sermon series, The Trouble with Herod, and we talked a little bit more about that in depth. Today, we're going to talk a little more about his sermon from this past Sunday called Conquering Loneliness. And specifically today, I have a handful of questions I'm going to ask David, just a handful. And we're going to ask kind of like, how do we unpack overcoming loneliness? How do we use the role of community in overcoming our aloneness, our loneliness, that kind of thing? And so if you missed the sermon on Sunday, the link to it will be in the comment section or in the description of the video. So look for it. You can listen to it. It's 20 minutes long. You can listen to it in a car ride. It's awesome. But something you said in there, you talked about John the Baptist as a character and as a role model of kind of faith in many respects. But you mentioned that part of the power of who he was he knew who he wasn't. And I think we were just talking about that kind of power and identity and understanding of who you are and yourself. And so there's a power in knowing who you aren't. There's a power in knowing who you are. And so John kind of worked on those things. I feel like in some respects that's like, it's internal work. It could be introverted work, but there's also this aspect of community involved in overcoming loneliness, but figuring out who we are and our identity and latching onto that. And so, what role does community play in conquering loneliness?
The church is, I think, the ideal place to process all of this. Now, the fascinating thing about John the Baptist is he's a guy in the wilderness. I mean, he's in a lonely place. In fact, there are places in the New Testament where it talks about Jesus going into the wilderness, and some of the Gospels describe it as a lonely place. So it's cool that John is in this lonely place, and yet it seems very clear the way all four Gospels portray him. He's not lonely. He's alone, but he's got some kind of self-awareness and comfort with who he is and who he's not. So the first point was the discovery of who we're not is such a powerful thing. And I think in community, so he was a part of community, but chose to move outside the community because of probably some disillusionment, frustration. So people started going to him.
Feel your pain, man.
But for those of us who choose to remain and be a part of a community, there is that power of kind of reflecting to each other. It's okay to be who you are, and it's okay to discover who you're not. And knowing who you're not, part of what we talked about in the sermon was the pressure that so many of us feel through social media, through advertisements, through the pressure of conformity in society. I mean, our economy is based on, we're going to buy stuff to try to make us feel better about ourselves and fit into who we're told by Madison Avenue, who we're supposed to be. And part of what I said on Sunday is there's this tremendous liberation in being able to say, no, I don't need to be that. I don't have to conform to what you tell me is the social norms that you're trying to get me to the role you want me to play. I can say, no, I'm not that. I don't need to be that.
And for somebody in my generation, like a millennial, I'm an elder millennial, but like for us, it's what's going to get us the most likes? What's going to get us the most shares? What's going to get people to affirm me in that online space for Instagram, social media, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, Snapchat, like what's going to get the response? And so we tend to abandon the thing that we think is unique to us, that we care about, for the affirmation, acceptance of the wider community that they just want you to be you. And they think you're being you when you're trying to, it's confusing.
It becomes this vicious cycle because they think you're being you when in fact you're fitting into what they want you to be. So I think there is this real refreshing aspect of that John kind of puts out there. They're saying, so are you the Messiah? Are you the prophet? Are you Isaiah? Or are you something that we need to get excited about? And John basically goes, no, I'm not that. And then he knows who he is. So he knows who he's not, but his role, who he is I'm here to prepare the way for Jesus. And so that's the other power of being in a community that says, this is really not about us, this is about Jesus.
Yeah.
And so to be liberated from trying to fit into what people are telling us we're supposed to be, and to be called to be this cool conduit of blessing and affirmation of faith, and saying, hey, there's something bigger here than I can ever offer, but I can tell you about it, I can point you to Jesus. And so that's really exciting, and I think helps people feel like we're not alone, we're in this together. And so the power of being church is both the comfort of a bunch of people who can say, you know what, I'm sort of broken. I sort of need to be with other people right now. Yeah. I'm feeling lonely, but I need to be with people who can help me feel like I'm a part of a larger whole.
Yeah.
And then together to be able to say, and here's what we can do together.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that's a good lesson from John
that's fantastic.
We really can get excited about. And I was telling you, I felt like the most response. I mean, I just could feel the energy in the first point when giving the sermon on Sunday, in describing John's revelation of we don't have to be that.
Yeah.
He knew who he wasn't. It's okay to know who you're not. And there was like this real sense of we need this. This is exciting. And so I think we're onto something there. I think John is really helping us push that. But then to know who we are is also just so important.
Well, and I mean, maybe for you, for me, I think it'd be good, but maybe for you, a good exercise would be to sit down with a journal or a piece of paper and write down at the top who I am not, and write out that. Yeah. Maybe if you're having a hard time figuring out who you are, start with the opposite. Like, who am I not?
Yeah. Yeah. And who I don't need to be.
And who I don't need to be. That's a huge one too.
Yeah.
Just a tip, pro tip. Right. So second question, what's the difference between being lonely and being alone?
Okay, well, so John, I mean, he's in the wilderness. He's in this lonely place, but it's clear he doesn't seem to be lonely. He's pretty energized about his role and what he's doing. And he's pretty excited about being the person preparing the way for Jesus. Yeah. And so he's alone. And some of us, I mean, one of the many advantages of being a pastor is getting to meet awesome people throughout my years of ministry, and seeing people who clearly are lonely and they need to be sort of brought back into the fold, and meeting people who are alone, but they are perfectly comfortable. They're content with who they are. They're content with what they need or don't need. And often those people tend to be a little older, they're wiser, they're more experienced, but not always. Sometimes they're perfectly comfortable with their sense of self and their self-awareness. And that one of the things that Paul talks about in Philippians, I think that's so important, is I've learned the gift of being content. And knowing what I don't need, knowing what I do need, and sort of the simplicity of my life is enough. Wendell Berry has a beautiful poem, that great preacher/farmer. Yeah. All that is here is enough. And it's basically this open field with geese flying over it. That's enough. Yeah. What we have is all we need. And so I think that whole idea of, okay, I may be alone, but I don't have to be lonely. I can know that God's presence is here. That was the other part of the sermon was from Isaiah 43, in this sense of these people. So there was a shift from the New Testament and John to the people in exile. So Isaiah 43, the prophet is preaching to these people this beautiful poetic message of people in exile. And I mean, they have every right to be lonely and to be angry and to despair and all that stuff. And yet the words are really, I mean, they resonate with this God saying, I am with you, don't be afraid. You're beautiful in my sight. I mean, all this great poetic imagery emerges out of this time of exile. And it's transformative for the people because they begin to realize this isn't just about us. This is about being a light to the nations, seeing ourselves kind of like John in the New Testament,
Yeah.
that we can point people to something beyond ourselves. So while they had the perfect excuse to just sit around and whine and be sad, instead, and some of them probably did, and certainly Isaiah even laments a lot, Jeremiah does, Ezekiel does, but woven into the laments are these powerful insights of, this isn't about us. This is about the broader vision of the people of God. And so it kind of goes back to your question about, well, what does community do for us? Well, it kind of lifts us up when we're down.
Yeah.
It helps us maintain that broader vision of there's something more out there that we can really be excited about.
Yeah. That's good. Good answer.
Thank you.
All right, third question. How can we discover relationships or friendships to help us when we're lonely? So you mentioned earlier, church, it's part of like a vital role of church and a function that a church community plays.
Mm-hmm.
But what are some ways people can discover, find, build a community or friendships, relationships, whatever you want to call them, to help them out of their loneliness?
Yeah. Well, we were discussing earlier that part of the problem when you're lonely, and lonely is sort of a word for a lot of other stuff. Sad. Even, sometimes when you're really lonely, it can drop into depression. And those are dangerous times where, this is something I think the church has not done really well over the years, is sort of
Big C church.
Big C church. Yeah. Being honest about the fact that this is part of being human is, we have times where we really do feel sad. We have these times where we feel really lonely and almost despairing. And you read the Psalms, and often on Sunday mornings we focus in on the third, or that 1/3 of the Psalms that are praise the Lord and everything's great and play all these instruments and be happy. But another third of the Psalms are laments. They're these very honest, transparent Psalms of deep emotion where the psalmist is confessing to sadness, loneliness, despair. Where are you, God? Jesus quotes from Psalm 22, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? This is a lament of the first order, where I think the first order of business in church life is to acknowledge, what, sometimes we have times like this. You don't have to be the joyful Christian all the time.
Yeah.
You can acknowledge, hey, I'm sad and I need help. So I think the first order of business is to just acknowledge the truth.
Yeah.
I'm having a rough time.
And it's okay to be human.
Exactly.
We are human beings.
Yeah. And it's biblical.
Yeah.
It is. Here the Psalms are telling us sometimes you need to just sort of shout out, I'm angry, I'm hurting, I'm sad, I feel alone. But then the second order of business is we're there for each other. Part of the power of community is, whether it's a Sunday school class or a small group or just friendships. I was sharing with you earlier the power I've had in my own life of these difficult times where, for whatever reason, somebody was perceptive enough to notice, it seems like you're not real happy right now.
Yeah.
You're struggling. Let's go get some coffee together. And so there's the permission that the church needs to give us to say, first of all, acknowledge I need a little help from other people. I am sad. Secondly, to say yes to the people that reach out to us. Because the tendency sometimes in church life is to pretend. The sin of pretense is horrible in church, where everything's fine. When you've got on your happy clothes and you've got to put on your happy face.
Yeah.
And to be able to say, I could use some help. To say yes to the outreach of somebody who says, let's go get some coffee together. Let's go take a walk together, is a redemptive moment of the first order, to be able to give yourself permission to accept help from somebody.
Well, and I've had that experience here where people on Sunday morning, I'm very averse to just putting on a smiley face on Sunday mornings. If if I wake up and I had a rough week or I'm having a bad week, I'm just depressed because it's a struggle. I'm very transparent about it, and so I've had instances where I've had folks come up to me here and be like, "Hey, how's it going? You know, how was your week?" And I was like, "It was pretty rough," and I'm here.
And then they don't know what to say.
Sometimes some don't, and some are like, "Oh, do you need to talk about it? Do you want to grab lunch after this?" That's incredibly I usually say no, but and I should probably say yes. But the fact that there's an invitation on the table means the world to me.
Right.
So, and I know I'm not the only one in this community that feels that way. That's very insight.
So it's a two-track thing. The first is having the spiritual maturity to say it's okay to be open to help.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, for those you're interacting with, to have the spiritual maturity to say, "Wow, so you've had a bad week.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it."
And honestly, like sometimes the best thing that you can do if you don't know what to say to somebody is like, "Yeah, I'm struggling right now." Just invite them to come and be like, "I'll listen."
Yeah.
Like it's not that hard to listen to folks. So that's a challenge that we could put at the table for all y'all. Like maybe on Sunday, don't put on a face. Just be real. And if you encounter somebody who's being real, invite them in with open arms. Like invite them to the table to sit down and talk. Like it's powerful.
Yeah. I think there's no question about that. I love the way you use the plural of y'all.
Y'all, yeah.
All y'all.
All y'all. Y'all means all.
Yeah.
So I'll go to the fourth question. How can community affirm or remind us of who we are? You kind of talked about this a little bit, but talk about it some more. Like how can a community we identify with affirm our own identity, I guess?
Yeah. This gets back to, for me, sort of the power of interacting with wise people who've walked the walk and lived the journey. And I think a church like ours that has this great eclectic mix of people who've been around for a while. I mean, we've got folks in our church that are just really super wise.
Incredibly.
And it's so helpful for younger adults and even middle-aged adults to sort of bump up against those folks that have been in relationships for 50, 55 years and can kind of give some wisdom on hanging in there and realizing, oh, you know what? Sometimes marriage can be really hard. Sometimes you need help. You need to go to a marriage counselor. That's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
That's an important thing. It's like a tune-up in a relationship. And so to really recognize the value of being on a spiritual journey with other people. And those spiritually mature people will acknowledge the fact that over their journey, there was somebody else that mentored them or were available as sort of an advisor or a mentor or a role model. And so, I think Jesse Jackson used to say, God is not finished with me yet. And sometimes he would use it as an excuse after he made some mistake or something. Yeah. But I think there's power in that phrase, that the wiser you are, the more you realize God is not finished with you yet. I think it was Socrates that used to say, the more I learn, the more I realize I don't understand.
Ain't that the truth?
And really, I think that's helpful when we can say, all right, I really like the way he conducts himself. He seems like he's very content. Or I love the way she carries herself. She seems like she has some wisdom that I could use. And to take advantage of that. I think that's the other gift of community, is being with people that they would readily acknowledge they don't have it figured out, but they've got some scar tissue that allows them to say, well, here's what I learned from this difficulty in my life. And for those who are younger, to be able to go, okay, that's really helpful.
Yeah.
I resonate with that. Because that's where I am right now.
I mean, like my own life, like the relationships I have with older adults, people who've gone before me, have been some of the most beneficial relationships I've had in my life. Yeah. To helping grow me the heck up. I mean, they know the questions to ask.
Right.
They know the challenges to put in front of me.
Yeah.
They know when to backhand me and tell me I'm being stupid. Like, I mean, I'm from Kansas. My family's there. My grandparents are there. Like, everybody's there.
Yeah.
So, kind of de facto, community here in Atlanta has become my family.
Right.
And so, finding ways and relationships to invest in here,
Right.
they're kind of stand-ins,
Mm-hmm.
and even people in this church. So it's incredibly.
Well, see, I think that raises this valuable piece of community power, and that is that we become surrogate family for each other.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, I mean, a metropolitan area like Atlanta,
It's massive.
it's just so many people have been displaced, and they've made a choice to relocate here. And so they lose the gift of grandparents and parents and support, and there are older folks who miss the gift of grandchildren and children, and so we sort of fill that role. There's a lot of historical information about the early church in Rome, where this was the metropolitan area of the 1st and 2nd century, where people from all over the empire were moving, and then they would discover that here they are in this big metropolitan city, all this cool stuff going on, lots of neat sights to see, but they were lonely.
Yeah,
And they
sounds
realized,
like Atlanta.
so the power, I mean, they're surrounded by people.
Yeah.
They weren't alone in a physical sense, but they were lonely because they didn't really have anywhere to plug in. And everything was kind of superficial. And the power of that early church, one of the ways that people began to feel really connected to each other was they realized this became surrogate family.
Yeah.
And so we've got all these awesome little tidbits, like 1st and 2nd Timothy. You get these little things where Paul's giving Timothy advice on how to minister to people who don't have family.
Yeah.
And so you're talking about not just young adults, but senior adults who've moved to a place and they've sort of grown up.
Yeah.
And grown old in a place where they've got to reach out to people. So I think this now just sort of percolates through the centuries.
Yeah.
And here we are in Atlanta and Decatur. We've got this great opportunity to be grandparents, parents, and children to each other.
Well, something I had a conversation with my mom years ago, and we talked about how, parents raise kids, and then the kids leave, and they're empty nesters.
What do I do now?
Well, I'm technically a professional parent,
Right.
and then now what?
Right.
And I feel like, and for younger people to be able to step in, or even those professional parents to say, hey, I'm available to counsel, to coach, to be a spiritual mother, father, whatever.
Yeah.
It's huge because you have this experience under your belt. Use it, and it's important.
Right.
Here at the church, we have a youth group that those youth are hungry for that kind of relationship, and so hit up Kelsey. It'd be important.
Right.
Okay, last question, and then we're done. Loneliness can be overwhelming. What are some resources or places I can go to have someone help me navigate my loneliness?
Yeah, so we've been talking back and forth about the power of church and the importance of community, friendships. I think there's also the professional aspect. And you mentioned that we're so lucky, so fortunate, so blessed here to have the Verdery Counseling Center.
Yeah.
And Monique is the director of the Verdery Counseling Center, is an awesome pastoral counselor.
She's incredible.
So whether a person chooses here to go to her and be a part of that professional counseling opportunity, or for those who are part of congregations far and wide, there are professionals who do this for a living to really help people talk through their loneliness. And you and I talked about the fact I'm a verbal processor, and it's really helpful for me to just sit with somebody and have them listen to me kind of go through stuff I'm dealing with. And sometimes I don't even know that I'm dealing with stuff until it comes out of my mouth, and I go, wow, where'd that come from? Whoa. And then that person's able to reflect back to me, sounds like you're kind of stressed out, or sounds like you're really sad, or sounds like you're really worried about this. And so I think the resources in virtually especially every metropolitan community like Decatur or Atlanta, there are these awesome resources, often very affordable, many times on a sliding scale, where we can go and have somebody help us sort of work through this. In places where people don't have that resource, I think that, again, the power of friendship, to be able to just realize, okay, I've got 2 or 3 or 4 people in my life that really mean a lot to me, and I'm going to have to be honest with them. And I need them to just sit and listen. And so to sort of build up that courage to go to the person you trust and say, hey, can we talk for a little while?
Yeah.
So I think those are the kind of resources we don't really acknowledge that we've got in our lives. But the power of knowing and being known is really a rich spiritual resource I think God gives to us through friendship and relationship. And a lot of times we fail to realize how much that can mean.
Yeah.
So whether it's a professional relationship where you actually pay somebody to sit down and say, be quiet for a little while and let me just run through some stuff that's going on in my head and heart, or just we do the coffee thing. And the final piece of this that you and I were talking about earlier is sometimes when you're depressed or really sad, it's hard to get the energy or even feel like I'm worthy enough to say, I need to reach out, I need to ask for help. So I think that's the thing we need to keep helping people realize. It is biblical to say, you know what, I'm really angry right now, I'm really hurting right now. And to somehow just get that strength to say,
the courage,
somebody help me. But the other thing is to be aware of one another. And I think what's happened with me in the past, when I haven't had that ability to say, I need some help, to have someone close to me or even a church member to say, hey, let's go have lunch. And to give yourself the permission to say, okay, let's do it. And then be able to be honest and kind of unload some stuff is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think this for me was very helpful in processing some more of what you talked about on Sunday. I hope this was really helpful for you guys. If you have any questions, anything you would like to ask David or like us to follow up on, you can leave a comment in the comment section at the bottom of the video, and we'll get back to you. I'll pester him. I'll make him answer it. But other than that, don't forget, you can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify. You can also go on our website, fbcdecatur.com/sermons, and find everything there. We hope to do this again soon. Let us know how we're doing. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt.
Yep.